All right.
Okay.
All right. I have the great honor of being here today with Yves and Laura, Yves Gleichman and Laura Blackett, who've written this fantastic novel that, spoiler alert, I got to write a blurb for way back before it came out. It's called Trust and Safety. It is just so good on so many levels. I'm gonna, if you two don't mind, I'm gonna summarize it like super quickly, and then you can jump in and add way more relevant detail. But this is the story of a pair of millennial New Yorkers, Rosie and Jordan, who move to upstate New York, kind of at Rosie's urging, because well, her tech bro, boyfriend, fiance, even after he becomes right, like they become more kind of like deeper involved. There's still a sense of kind of a non-committalness, at least emotionally, even though he was too deep in the commitment. Sorry, I'm getting a little discursive here, but anyway, the tech bro boyfriend, right, is like totally happy to stay in New York and keep earning his money. But Rosie, because of this sort of, this sense of like searching, longing, yearning, kind of follows her Instagram algorithm to this, this house in upstate New York that is kind of like has a Edna St. Vincent Millay vibe, right? And when these two are going to move up there, they're going to fix it up, and they're going to live this like beautiful, like back to nature, off the grid, kind of simple lifestyle. Think kinfolk, right? Like that kind of like millennial, back to the earth aesthetic, where like it's simple, but not too simple that it can't be marketed on Instagram and TikTok. And so they're going to do that, but they encounter what ends up being this not terribly friendly, kind of like queer poly group of folks who are like not very excited about having them there. Dylan and Lark being the two kind of main members of that group, they move into their little sort of guest house, cottage house that's adjacent to the larger property. And ostensibly they're just gonna pay their rent and help Jordan and Rosie make ends meet. But things get a whole lot more complicated, and it becomes a conversation less of how the rent's going to get paid and more of what's happening in terms of millennial sexual politics, broadly writ. So that's my weird summary. You two, you could say so much more and so much more detail about this. Let's actually start there with a very just simple, wide open question of what got you two wanting to write a book like this and thinking about these themes together.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having us. It's really actually so nice to hear somebody else summarize the book. I think like we're asked to do that so much that it feels great to see it like through somebody else's eyes.
Mm-hmm.
So thanks. Uh yeah, we have thought about this a lot. When we first started writing the book in 2020, technically we wrote the first chapter in 2020. We took some time off, and I think that we weren't working in earnest for 4 years, but we did sort of like start out 4 years ago. And we were both living in upstate New York, but in like very different ways. So I kind of like our protagonist, Rosie, had been kind of burnt out on living in Brooklyn, and I started to get curious about what it would be like to live in a rural area, and in like one particular town in upstate New York where I had one friend. And I thought this was like a good place to try to like kind of start over. And I think I had a lot of her sort of desires, and I think I harbored a lot of her fantasies about what life up there might look like. And so I ended up moving into this like really old farmhouse. I took like a 1 month sublet, and it was supposed to be just me. But then the pandemic hit, and all of the housemates who were traveling like came home. And suddenly I was living with 3 other people. They were queer artists. Like there was like a seamstress and a painter and a mycologist. And I was, doing my remote tech job and sort of peering over the top of my laptop and like looking out the window and seeing one of my housemates tapping maple trees for maple syrup and dyeing clothes pink from avocado seeds. And in some ways I felt like I had like arrived at the fantasy that I had had of what life would be like up there, but I wasn't totally fitting in. Like in one way I was, because I was fitting in creatively a little bit because I was working on a novel project and I had that to kind of show for myself, but I was also like doing a remote tech job and I had brought the city up with me in some ways. And I felt basically just way too corporate for that environment. And so at least I look back to my experience in that house and I felt really like inspired to live near these people doing these really cool creative things. I felt like I was kind of straddling two worlds, like I didn't totally fit in. And yeah, I had gotten kind of close, but I was still sort of peering through the window into like a fantasy version of what my life could be. And Eve had a really different setup.
Yeah, my setup was that during the very first part of the pandemic, my partner and I went upstate to basically to live with her ex-husband and the two kids. So there were 5 of us living in this house that used to belong to the 2 of them and was, belonged to just him at this, during well, still now, but during the pandemic. And so that was just such a, I don't know, just such a wild premise, real life premise, that we would all be living under the same roof. And he invited our cats along too, which was, actually extremely generous. But the combination of people was just like, I just remember thinking like, what is going to happen here?
Right.
Like,
It was like you and your partner, her ex-husband, their 2 kids, your 2 cats.
yeah.
Like it was so, there was a lot going on.
There's a lot going on. And yeah, and it was like I was also experiencing her previous straight marriage, having never really experienced that before. It was like we were living in the house and we were eating dinners together. And so I think now when we look back at the book, it's really clear that both of our living situations were like really went into it. I don't know if that answers your question, but those were the early ingredients.
Yeah, we would in the early part of the pandemic when it was cold still, we would like drive to each other and park trunk to trunk and 6 feet apart and sit in our trunks and just talk and plan. And I think that like, yeah, I don't think looking back, it seems so obvious that that's where the story came from, or like a huge part of the story came from. I think that there were certain, but I don't think that I felt like that was what was happening at the time. Like I thought I was just talking to my friend and like commiserating and yeah, and just sort of trying to get through it. And I think that though there were some things that I like knew that I felt excited about writing about, like I felt excited about writing about some of the natural beauty that you can find in upstate New York. And I knew that I wanted there to be like an obsessive crush and kind of elements of like voyeurism between these 2 neighboring properties. Like, Rosie and Jordan start to live next door to this queer polycule and they kind of look through the window. And I was really excited about writing the parts where they're kind of watching each other. Yeah.
I mean, it's from what you've told me, I'm always so fascinated by people's pandemic books, right? Confidence was mine, this was yours.
Yeah.
Face was R.F. Kuang's. Like it's like so wild how and I've loved all the ones I've read actually so far. But Laura and Eve, you both you respectively were living in novels, right? And then you created like those are both like incredible premises for a novel.
Yeah.
Laura's yours could have gone either like queer utopia or horror movie. And Eve, I mean, to my original point, right? Who needs the Judith Butler when you like lived that like the actual character-based scenario where here you have this queer relationship kind of in this environment, right? Where just really normal heterosexuality played out for years. And it's such an interesting normal, you know what I mean? It's such an interesting kind of man, it's such a situation where we were all living these intense experiences during the pandemic, and then the writing that came out of it.
Yeah. Well, one thing that was true, I think I haven't really thought about this before, but one thing that was true of both of our living situations in the pandemic is that it just happened to be that we ended up in households where we were actually getting to know new people, basically. Like, you know, you didn't know
Yeah.
Marie's ex-husband, and I didn't know at least two of my housemates. And so it was sort of this like sudden lockdown isolation, but also with some new people. And like, I think, you know, that it seems like for both of us, I know that your situation was hard at times, but I think it probably could have gotten way more nightmarish.
Oh yeah. It was actually kind of, I mean, I'm sure things are rosier in retrospect, but I'm like, you know, I've never done so much hiking. I've never done so much cooking. I've never done, you know, like there were.
I guess, I mean, like interpersonally, I think it all could have exploded, and I don't think it did for either of us.
I think that's true.
Totally.
I think that's true.
Oh, that's so, wow. Yeah, that's, so there's so much to say there, and yet I have so many questions as well. So I have no choice but to move on. But that's like, it's so cool how that kind of, that was the crucible, right, in which this book was forged. The very pleasant, scenic, hike and cooking filled crucible. That's a nice crucible. Yes. So I think like what I mean, I love so much about your Choose book. You know, there's just so much that like I'm sure a lot of queer folks have told you this by now, right? Like, oh, look, this was written for me. I mean, look, I'm wearing the hat. We haven't addressed the recording. You two already know this, but all you viewers out there, I'm wearing the hat. I'm a content creator, so I have to advertise. But yeah, no, I mean, like real talk, like it feels very much like an of the moment queer book. And I think like beyond the you know, the obvious stuff I like, right? Like of like you've got this just like firebrand brilliant humor. You're kind of, you're not sparing anyone in the satire, right? Like, yeah, we're coming for Jordan, right? Yeah, we're coming for Instagram, and we're also coming for this kind of like over, you know, the sort of like idealization of the like woodsy polycule, right? Like the woodsy polycule isn't entirely innocent, right? And we'll come back to that later on, but you know, this book has one of my all-time favorite truck rides I think I've ever encountered in fiction. You know, the God, I can't get over the Dylan is Darcy comparison in my mind. But like it really is. I think it felt, at least I'll just speak for myself here. It felt for me at least like a book that is successfully thematizes queerness in like the complex way it needs to be thematized, right? So we're in a situation, I think, politically, right, where it's like the partisan conversation, right, about queerness is not a nuanced one, right? Like there's demagoguery coming from conservatives about like XYZ, about the sort of the LGBTQIA lifestyle, from like trans rights to, you know, to queer rights to reproductive rights, right? Kind of, and then you do have though as well, I would say some like really, if not demagogic, then like intense and unsparing rhetoric coming from the left. I think that has gone unexamined, right? And this is not me advocating for centrism either, but rather this kind of maybe, I don't know, Zen master ascension away from all of the partisan nonsense, which literature affords us, which literature like that you've written affords us. And so what I think is so cool about this book, right, is that like you, I mean, I grew up on the internet. I grew up, right, in various internet niches, being like going from sort of discovering, you know, my own sexuality and gender stuff to taking on a whole host of rhetoric that was it's incredibly pessimistic, right, about normalcy, quote unquote, right? Like, oh, I don't need a man, right? I don't need that white picket fence. I don't need this. I don't need that. You know, I can envision this kind of queer utopian chosen family situation for myself. And so, well, that, you know, so much of that is like so useful and subversive and powerful and beautiful, right? We sometimes lose sight of the fact that, like, in challenging those really like limiting and oppressive norms, we can go in the opposite direction, right? And like start to get like limiting and oppressive ourselves. And so, and that's what I love so much, right, about like spoiler alert, some of the hypocrisy we see in Dylan and Lark, right? Especially the way Dylan is moving, like the way Dylan's moving through the world in some ways, um, where like, yeah, like it seems as if with the arrival of Rosie and Jordan, heterosexuality has like come to this like beautiful, picturesque little woodsy town, but with the way the kind of like conflict, right, between the polycule and Jordan unfolds, right? The way that like there is like Rosie coerces and is coerced, right? There's some sticky stuff that happens here.
Mhm.
And so I'm wondering if you two can kind of comment on, I don't know, the not necessarily like queer villainy, right, or queer innocence, because that's another tired dialectic, but like complex queerness, right? The complexity of these characters and kind of like how you see like that polycule kind of, I mean, or if you see it being emblematic for maybe a more nuanced conversation we could have about like how we are trying to move through the world and talk about queerness and talk about queer rights without slipping in to this more demagogic conversation about like all good or all bad,
Mhm.
that I don't know, has kind of troubled me. This is why your book appeals to me so immensely. It's just so interesting for that reason.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Uh, that's a really fascinating question, and I think I'm trying to think of the best approach. Maybe from like the last thing you said of all good versus all bad. I mean, I think of this as a character question.
Yeah.
And I think that the first version of this book, or the first draft of this book was very flattened out and was very good versus bad, and we did really want to humiliate the husband character Jordan, and we wanted to punish him for being a straight white guy,
Right.
um cis guy, and just really put him through hell, and we really delighted in that. And then that
Is your
turned out
voodoo
to not
doll.
be. Yeah, he was a voodoo doll. Like we cut a lot of scenes where we were just sort of humiliating him and making and emasculating him. And it just actually wasn't that interesting. And I didn't want our allegiances to be well, I guess I didn't really want to have an allegiance to any of these characters particularly. And or if we did, I didn't want it to show, because I just think that makes for more interesting fiction. Um, if you have a character who seems to be one way and then turns out to be exactly that way, that's actually not very interesting. It's like I don't know. Like I that's not the kind of book that I want to read. And so I think at a certain point, as we got more into the writing of these characters, we came to realize it was sort of like, Rosie is looking at this queer polycule the same way that she's looking at things on Instagram, and she is idealizing them. And I just think that if something looks too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. And so I think it's exciting to try to figure out the ways that this polycule was too good to be true. Um,
Yeah, I think that, sorry, did I
no, go
interrupt?
ahead.
I think that well, one stray thought is that some of my favorite dialogue to write was Jordan's dialogue, asking pretty good questions that annoy Rosie about how the polycule is even like surviving financially. I enjoyed that. Like I sort of enjoyed any opportunity that I had to sort of be like, but what is going on here? And I think that we wrote in some of that. I remember having conversations with you, Eve, where we were really trying to make Jordan seem uncool by like asking the right questions that Rosie was too sort of enamored to ask. Like I think that we wanted to give him a level of suspicion about the polycule that would seem crazy or uncool, but that actually had some like merit to it. Like I remember sort of intentionally trying to do that. So that was just a stray thought. But then another thing that has just crossed my mind is that I think that Rosie's fantasy of Dylan is also Dylan's fantasy of Dylan. And I think that in some ways, like, this book is kind of about like the power of like fantasy. And I'm thinking too, like, one of the things that we, have yet to be asked about, so I'm just going to bring it up, is the fact that the house that they move into is sort of this like historic lesbian painter's house, and it's this sort of like local cultural landmark. And this part of the book that I think we kind of shrunk in editing, but basically, like, we had this painter be part of the Hudson River School of Painting. I'm not an art historian and didn't do research, but basically it's just this school of painting really interested in doing really idyllic, kind of gorgeous landscape paintings in upstate New York. And these paintings would, at the time, would be brought back to New York City and unveiled to the city dwellers, sometimes behind a curtain. So they would all come and stand around and look at this beautiful painting, sort of in the way that Rosie's using Instagram to look at images of upstate New York. But then meanwhile, you kind of forget that in order for this painting to exist in the first place, somebody has had to travel up there on a steamship or whatever, set up a little studio in untouched, I'm using air quotes if this is recorded, land. And I just thought, like, that has been in the book since the beginning, even though I think in the end it got smaller. So anyway, this is just to come back. I think it's kind of about fantasy. Yeah.
Wow, that's gosh, I mean, I love so much because I saw her. Yeah, I saw this like 19th century lesbian painter, right, as being this kind of, I think I said Enna St. Vincent Millay earlier, obviously writer, not painter, but like or almost another writer, but like a Juna Barnes, Myrna Loy, kind of too, like this sort of like fin de siècle, right? So like late 19th, early 20th, whatever, kind of like queer woman intellectual who's getting a little bit erased over time, more than a little bit, right? And this, like, het couple moving into her house is kind of like the total reification of that erasure, right? Where it's like, and here's heterosexuality, right? To kind of blow apart to smithereens any aspect of her memory. But I think what you said there, Laura, especially just really struck me, of like how, where are these images coming from, right? Who is producing them? Who's taking the photo, right? And there's such a disconnect between the actual, like, whatever the photographic apparatus, the art being made in the place, and the consumer, whether it's 1893 or 2024. And so I just think that, like, yeah, the ideal, right, is some the it's like the beauty is in the eye of the beholder thing, right? Because it's like the ideal meant something to Rosie, just as it meant something to Dylan, just as it meant something to whoever else is looking at it. Different, right, than what the next person sees or what it actually is, right? And so, like, fantasy, and this leads me kind of onto my next question, comment kind of thing, is like, fantasy really is like, I don't know. Okay, so there's this sense, right, of like, I think in the discourse TM of like the like the lives that we're expected to lead under, like, the boomers kind of capitalism of, like, again, the white picket fence, the high paying job, owning the property, having the kids, right? That as being not just fantasy but a phantasm, right? As like being hyper real, like we thought it could exist but it doesn't actually exist, and even when it looks like it's existing and working, it really wasn't. The nuclear family was like not feeling good for anyone, right? Or the white picket fence was actually kind of, I don't know, symbolically carceral in some ways or whatever. So, and which is like, and there's truth to, a lot of, so many of those points, but I think there's also truth to the perfection, right, of the polycule's life, right? And I guess I would love for you to speak more, kind of about, I guess, this concept of the fantasy, right? And how, like, Rosie's bubble is burst, right? Like, she thought she was going to have it made in the shade, you know, with Jordan, and then she kind of shifts her affinity to this kind of, you know, woke pastoral life, right? Where like she's going to like now be bed by Dylan and, you know, now like become the new Lark in a sense, right? And it's just so interesting to me how like different throughout different periods of time, different people have been like, well, this is real. This is what you should want, young people. You should want a family. And now the discourse has shifted to like, well, this is what you should want. You should want a chosen family who like weaves on a beautiful loom, like, you know, and that shifting sense of the real, right? Like, how do you feel like that kind of the characters, Rosie in particular, but like the other characters too, deal with that in the book, right? Bubbles being burst.
Yeah.
I think that like if, you know, if one doesn't know what they want, they're attracted to people who do know what they want. And I think that is like Rosie's story ultimately is like, you know, in the beginning of the book, we had them get married. We had Rosie and Jordan get married after a really short time. And we have some line that's like, you know, Rosie just wanted to say yes to something that would change her life. And I think that Jordan's confidence was really buoying for her. And then and also just I think, and one of the things that I like about Jordan is that, you know, he knows what he wants. You know, it's not maybe what I want, or maybe it feels like maybe I could find things to criticize about it, but like he at least is kind of clear-eyed about what he wants. And that's true, I think, for Dylan in some ways, and the polycule too. And I think that like, yeah, I think for Rosie, who's so ambivalent, and so looking for someone to just hand her a life or something, I think.
Yeah, and she thinks that that money is the thing that gets her the life. And
Yeah.
she, you know, she meets Jordan through Instagram because he's in an advertisement. That, you know, like he's in an ad, he's a tech bro and he's in an ad as a model for an axe company. And he like does not know how to use an axe, but the image would tell her otherwise. And she's totally seduced and reaches out to him, and that's how they get together. And then she sees houses on Instagram, and that's how, and she sees a carrot peeler that like she thinks if she buys is going to totally change her life. And so I think she's just really committed to the idea that with enough money, one can live a different kind of life, or like escape, transcend themselves. But everywhere she goes, she's still trapped in the body, you know, like she still has her own self to contend with. And so it's just perpetual wanting and discomfort and second guessing and uncertainty. And so I think that's a big problem for her.
Right. Like, yeah, she's such a consumer, and this polycule, you know, they end up sort of not, you know, being so much as they seem or whatever. Like there are things, I don't know how, if we're going to do spoilers or what, but
We are.
anyway, arrives and they're making things, and she's buying things. And I think she can only get so close with that. Yeah.
It's like the phrase that popped in my mind, instead of object-oriented ontology, which I mean it is an object-oriented ontology, but it's like an Instagram-oriented ontology, right? Where it's like she needs to acquire objects, and those objects are given to her like via the algorithm. And nothing, just like you said, like nothing can be made, right? It must all be prefabricated and hoarded. And there's a sense, I think, of like a really like just a super great, I don't know, critique of late capitalism there, right? Of like searching for oneself, feeling like an object, and searching for other objects to remedy that feeling.
Yeah.
We're still of the
Yeah.
flesh. Also,
I do think, oh, but no, go ahead.
I was just gonna say super quickly, so I definitely want to hear what you were saying. So but Eve, when you said, thank you for bringing up the axe thing, because I I had a girlfriend, my like first queer, like public out queer relationship. She was Jordan, but she was a tech bro. Like she was a tech bro, but a lesbian. And she was absolutely Jordan, and she was obsessed with axes, and she and other
Wow.
tech bros would send each other axes, and she would pose with her axe like a lumberjack. And I was like, this is weird.
Wow. We have
Ever use it? Would she ever use it, or no? It was just for photo.
No, I posed with the axe and she posed. I still have the photo. I can send
That's
it to you
so
to
funny.
great
Wow.
transition and everything. Yeah, I was like, this feels weird. We're in the city of Chicago, not a tree to axe for a mile, no wood to chop, anything. But here I am
Wow,
standing like a lumberjack. Yeah.
that's
So
so
and
funny.
I was like, this is insane that this details in this book.
Wow.
Yeah, that
Yes.
is really
Incredible.
funny.
I'm so sorry.
Um,
Go ahead, Laura. What were you going to say?
no, at this point, it's just a straight thought, which is that we just like wanted to give them more money than talent, and then to put them next to people with talent. And I think that that's at least one idea, like sort of one of the satirical components that I think made it through. Yeah.
Well, and actually the more money than talent comment I think is like really leads into my next question, because I think that so many like millennial writers are trying to, succeeding, whatever. I've seen kind of mixed results, kind of taking on Silicon Valley, right? And talking about just like how like they're like the self-optimization economy and how everything is an app, and taking on the like really comic figure of the startup CEO, the tech bro, right? I mean, it's kind of, he is an absurd figure, right? He's at best tragicomic, right? And at worst he's Elon, right? Or there's so many other examples, the WeWork guy, oh god. But so we are doing spoilers, don't worry. This is the Podstack is rife with spoilers. um and so I was like, and this is actually, I'm gonna have, before we go, don't let me forget, I'm gonna have you read a section from the book. I always do that before the end of the interview. But I I love the fact that this guy's kink is the most like the most normal thing ever, which is getting his wife pregnant sort of accidentally. And he's like used his kink to create this like really horrifying app where now queer people, right, who cannot like get their girlfriends pregnant accidentally, right? They can now have simulate the experience that would be very sexually satisfying for him, Jordan. Um,
Yeah.
it is such a like, I mean, there's so much talk, I think, like about like desire and the problem and how problematic desire can be, like, in feminist theory and in like just generally, online. And I think that like this is such a really brilliant way to lampoon that, right? To this like this guy has commodified his own desire in this very specific way, and it's not so out of the ordinary from what we see out there. So I'm like really curious, I mean, if you could please tell the modest viewing audience more about where you came up with this, and then just any thoughts in general, right, on the kind of intersection of like desire and like weirdness in Silicon Valley and the tech bro life.
Yeah, it's fun to get to talk about this part of the book because we never do, because nobody ever wants to talk about spoilers. So this
Yeah,
is the
I always
first
do.
time we've talked about this part of the book and what happened. Maybe we should just say what happens. Does that help?
Mhm.
What happens is that Jordan wants a family with Rosie. Rosie is ambivalent. Jordan is sort of desperate to get her pregnant. It's his kink, but it's also just his
It's
like
a sincere wish.
sincere wish is
Your
to have
wish.
a baby.
Jordan is like the 19th century heroine in this sense, in a way. So wild, the gender roles. I'm sorry, go on.
I know. He just wants her to have he wants Rosie
Yeah.
to have a baby. And
No, go ahead.
and so she's ambivalent, she's not really saying yes, and he's basically behind the scenes making an app that allows that's targeted, I would say, to lesbians who can't get pregnant accidentally in the heat of the moment in like a sexy kind of way. Like, oops, we did that. And so his app like delivers like within minutes sperm from donors in a little drone, like at the tap of a button, so that lesbians can have the experience that he fantasizes about all the time. So that's what this is. And I think, what were we doing? We wanted, so,
Well, we're just sorry. One thought is just that like even in Jordan's, even in sex, which I think, you know, is a place where I don't know, desires that are like maybe are unacceptable or something can come out in hot ways. Like even in sex, Jordan can't imagine anything outside of the realm of like his normal, current, actual, literal life.
Right.
So that was the thought that I was having.
yeah, oh, poor guy. Yes. And we liked the idea that what we want, we like the idea that Rosie would get pregnant at the end of this book, and that we wouldn't know who the father was. Was it Jordan or was it Dylan, the neighbor? And if Dylan, the neighbor, who's not a man, who couldn't get Rosie pregnant, um, uh, was the father, that just felt really exciting to us. Like that idea that Rosie would be pregnant, and this is how it played out, that Rosie's pregnant at the end of the book and she truly doesn't know, was this pregnancy the result of having sex with my husband, or was it the result of my hot queer neighbor ordering this drone
Full of his sperm.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And that she, the neighbor, owns, so it
Yeah.
belongs to her. I don't know, this whole idea of like, who does it belong to? Who gets to be the father? I remember like described this idea to our agent at the beginning of writing the book. And she was like, it's not who's the father, it's how's the father. And we were like, yeah, but we still don't really know what that means. But
it had a good ring at the time, but now it might be the other way. Not how's the father, but
who's the father?
or
Yeah.
maybe both. I don't know. I think that well, this was like the ending was one thing where like I think, you know, I think that we early on had this idea about Jordan's kink being like very regular and like not kinky. And then I think at a certain point we just doubled down on it. Like, and I think that for the last like quarter or to a half of writing the book, we had the sense that the book would end this way. And we weren't sure, but we just went for it.
We were like,
and
are we gonna do this thing?
It was hard to do. It was really hard to do. Like at one point I mean, I don't know if these like logistical details are interesting at all, but like at one point we tried to give Jordan and Dylan the same name, and then like we tried to make it about like a heist, and at one point I think we had Dylan try to steal the baby, but that didn't happen. So
yeah, but I think we were interested in their rivalry, in the rivalry between Jordan and Dylan, and that they were both in a race to make a family with Rosie, and that by the end of the book we just didn't know who was responsible for this baby.
Right, but it's also like an asymmetrical rivalry. Like Jordan is obsessed with Dylan and enraged by Dylan, but Dylan sort of coolly is like not really that interested in Jordan. So it's like, you know, it reminds me of high school sports teams where one is just much better than the other, and like they have a sense of who their rival is, who they have no idea like who they are or what's going on. So yeah, I don't know if we answered your question, but that was
Sure did. And I don't know if y'all remember Blockbuster at all. I'm assuming you could be like so much younger than me, but I feel like we're the similar ages. If y'all went to Blockbuster in the 90s or anything.
Yeah.
Okay, we're similar ages. You know, that queer baby face, we all look young, I guess. But I was just imagined like the film adaptation of Trust and Safety, and like one of those like 90s VHS cases. It's like the tagline, it's not who's the father, but how trust and safety. I was like, this would be perfect. But I mean, yeah, right. Like it is. So I think like that's a wonderful answer. Thank you so much. And I think like what I love so much about this idea, right, of you know, like the question of paternity, right? Ultimately, which is enabled by Jordan's kink, right? And it calls to mind so many awesome things to me, right? It calls to mind, you know, right, like there's so much that's so 19th century about this book that I love, because I love 19th century literature so much. But it's a social novel, it's a satire in these really 19th century ways, and it calls to mind, right, these like the early definitions of homosexuality. Of course, it's, you know, it's between two men, because I mean, ladies can't really, how are they,
Yeah. How,
you know
how
what I
do you
mean?
do it?
And so Jordan is this kind of this like, he's a dude who's so patriarchal, right, that you could almost imagine, even though he's suspecting pretty constantly in the book of this tryst between Dylan and Rosie, you could imagine a 19th century version of Jordan just being totally oblivious, right? Yeah, to the very idea that any kind of romantic or intimate contact would be happening there, because like what would they, you know, it's very much Portrait of a Lady on Fire, it's very much Ammonite, it's phenomenal there. And then the other thing I love so much about this like starting a family thing, right? Like even though the polycule is a family, like there is a child, um and you know, like a third member has a child, and they're like kind of taking turns taking care of this child. But the like heterosexual family, right, the kind of like cis heteropatriarchal family unit, it's like the idea that it could still be like replicated, either infiltrated by queerness or replicated in a queer way, right? And there's a different version of this book in which Dylan is, I mean, I agree that Dylan's like the kind of like heart-wearing, disaffected, cool butch who like doesn't even care about the rage spittle of this cishet man, right? But there's another version of the book in which Dylan is happy to get down in the mud and wrestle with this guy. And we've known this butch, right? Who is also like really self-important, you know, and has whatever's kind of affecting Jordan and making him antagonistic and making him like step into masculinity in these, you know, to use an overused word, problematic ways. The same thing's happening for the butch. The same thing's happening for the lesbian,
Yeah.
right? He's like, well, I'm important too, and I'm a man too, you know. And there's this kind of really, really funny destabilization, not only of the cis heteropatriarchal family unit, but of queerness, right? Because you do see queer folks participating in these same sets of stereotypes that we kind of lampoon cis het folks for like overindulging in. And so I think it's so cool, right? There's like so many layers of destabilization happening there. Another reason it's so awesome. Um, I want to, before I get to the question about the collaborative writing of the novel, there's just one or two more things I wanted to ask about. I have a lot to ask about. I'm mindful of the time here. So I wanted to kind of shift the focus to the like the ancillary characters, right? Because we're really focused on like Rosie and Jordan and Dylan here, and the kind of the problem of Rosie's desire or lack thereof. But there's also, and I'm sorry, you'll have to refresh my memory, Jordan's friend, the other tech.
Noguchi.
Sorry,
Noguchi.
Gucci. He's hilarious. That character, I was actively like setting the book down to laugh. So funny. He has some of the best dialogue. Yeah, Noguchi and Rosie's friend, whom she's like doing the kind of like activism work with around like the sort of like Trevor Project-esque group she's working for, the queer rights group she's working for. I can't remember the name of it, but like Noguchi and her and you know, like Lark and the other member of the polycule. I'm sorry to be spacey with names in the moment, but I'm so curious kind of how if you could talk a little bit more about the ancillary characters and like how the roles you see them playing, right? And like you two are writers, again, like this is a social novel, this is a social satire. So this is a different species of novel from like, you know, memoir or auto fictional kind of novels where it's like it hews like very, 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 very closely to a specific POV that is specifically the author's. This is kind of covering a very like a wider range of territory, even though we are staying close on Rosie. So yeah, do you all have like characters you love to write? What purposes were those characters serving? Did you feel kind of dialectically, symbolically, like kind of how did that all occur to you?
Yeah, I loved writing Noguchi too. Like I thought it was so fun to write his dialogue.
Noguchi is Jordan's like BFF who works at the same tech company as him.
Yeah. And I think that like maybe with I'm thinking Alice is Rosie's like sort of best friend from home. And I think with all of these sort of ancillary characters, like at least in my mind, I'm like, I think we wanted to create some balance or just like some other perspectives. Like Rosie, Rosie, as we've mentioned, is really has this fantasy of what her life could be. It sort of is like an escapist fantasy. It's a super idealized and like kind of detached from reality, like endeavor that she's making. And meanwhile, her friend, who has basically the exact same life as her, except for one important detail, which is that her friend has hobbies and actual sort of interests, and she's like happy with her life. She's like, yep, there are things that I dislike about living in the city, but like I'm cool with it. And I think that what you need to do instead of buy this house upstate is go on vacation. And I think that introducing that perspective was important. With Noguchi, I see him as, I mean, I love Noguchi. I think he's so funny. Like I legitimately would enjoy having a beer with Noguchi, I think. And I think he sort of takes all of these elements of Jordan that I think Rosie feels embarrassed of, or maybe that Jordan, I don't know if this is true, but I'm just going to say it, that Jordan maybe tries to hide, although does Jordan try to hide? But anyway, Noguchi is basically carefree. He's like a carefree version of Jordan who is also kind of cool with himself. He's fine with his like materialism and kind of consumerism. He's like, this is just the way it is. And I don't know, there was something about that I think felt balancing.
Yeah, I
And
agree.
similar with Hank, who is the a chicken farmer that Rosie goes to work for. He's not in the polycule, but he is close. And he's kind of like not into Lark's like more woo-woo stuff. He's just he has a job. Like he has a job, he works hard, and that's what he does. So I think that for all of these other characters, I feel like it was about creating balance.
Yeah, like there's not just one way there's not just one attitude to have about the way you've decided to live your life. Yeah, yeah. And a little bit of comic relief, I think, Noguchi.
Yeah, Noguchi just is funny. Just so funny.
And I like that you brought up Hank too. Yeah, I didn't want to forget about Hank because he's transmask, right? Yeah. Hank, yeah, Alice, Noguchi, and Hank are all individuals who have like problems or species of problems similar to like what Rosie, Jordan, like some of them, the Dylan, some of the more main characters are kind of like struggling with. Lark, yeah, as well, right? But it feels like there's a sort of a sense of kind of like self-ownership, honesty, awareness, right? Because yeah, Alice, when Alice gets pregnant too, right? And then Rosie has all these complicated feelings, and it's kind of like having this anxiety spiral. There's this sense, I mean, I'm a huge, huge, huge fan of the show Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. I think it's a total text. I love that show. But there's an episode where Rachel Bloom's character witnesses her friends kind of like their lives stabilize in ways that she wishes hers would, right? And she has this whole process where like, instead of just seeing them as mirrors and being like, you know what, it's okay, that's happening for them. That just actually means it could probably happen for me too, if I stop like comparing myself and freaking out, right? But in that comparison and freak out is kind of where she loses herself for 23 minutes.
Right.
And I think like Rosie's in kind of a similar place, right? Where it's when she sees sort of Alice kind of, as you two are saying, like accepting herself, understanding her life, offering her the sound advice, right? Rosie's not yet in a place to receive it. And I think that it's that counterbalancing of those characters plus the like humor. It really, I mean, it felt like I don't know. I really did feel like I was reading a Jane Austen novel, and I was like, I love it. I love this. It's just so great. So yeah, and yeah, people, you really could read that book just for Noguchi. Like he is, oh my God, I love
Thank you for loving him. We love him too.
him so, yeah, no. When someone is like, yes, right, like super materialistic and a futurist and cynical, but also just owns it. Just
Oh,
owns
yeah, he says something
He's
in the
also fun. Like he's
yeah.
down for a good time. Like
Yeah.
anyway, what were you gonna say?
No, I'm just like remembering one line he has later in the book where he's like, oh, like Instagram can be fun if you just get rid of all the people you know and just let it be all advertisements. That like just lean into it. Like that's you don't fight it. Like he's all about not fighting, and that works out really, really well for him, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
He doesn't want anything to be anything other than what it is.
Yeah, yeah.
He's
It's
sort of the most zen character in the book.
Right. He is kind of sort of go with the flow. Like Jordan is hung up on like Jordan rolls his eyes at the fact that Dylan doesn't like labels to describe her, like maybe her sexuality or her relationships or whatever. Like the idea that Dylan doesn't like labels, Jordan is like, and he rolls his eyes at it. But Noguchi just kind of like rolls with it and improvises and is like, I think in the end refers to Dylan as like someone of the unlabeled experience, which I just thought was so funny. That's like my favorite. That was my favorite, remains one of my favorite jokes in the novel.
it's so good. It's, and like actually to go back to Hank briefly too, like Hank reminds me of a generation. Well, he like reminds me of, he's part of, if he's older, right? He's like a Gen Xer kind of guy, or is
I
he?
think
I don't know.
as being around their age. I think of
He's
him as
around their
being
age,
I
okay.
think it's like an older kind of
Vibe.
soul or something. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
But I don't think we gave him an age. So,
Okay.
anything
He's
you tell us.
an old soul at the very least, because like I have some actually in particular like trans mask friend, like Gen X trans mask friends, and there's a sense kind of from them of like, hey, I support your generation, but you're really screaming, like you're really yelling about everything and love you, but I'm just gonna go tend to my chickens, and like
Yeah.
there's a sense of kind of like this like well-meaning tolerance, but like at the end of the day, right? He's a transsexual and he needs to get his fucking chickens fed. Okay.
Yeah.
Not everything is about, right? Like, not again, like it's that feeling of coming from me, I think, of like oversaturation with discourse where it's like, a life where like, yeah, I'm trans, but what matters most is I'm feeding my chickens and looking at this beautiful vista over the hill. That's
Yeah.
really appealing to me. Um, Far more so than a life where I'm like, I need you all to know I'm trans. And I think that like, yeah, I think that like there's the queer experience and the trans experience kind of like encompasses a whole lot of different feelings and viewpoints, like on like, I don't know, on the topic of like identity and like loudness about identity. Um,
Hmm.
which actually leads me, sorry, I want to talk about heteropessimism, but one thing before that. This leads me to I've come down kind of hard on Dylan. It's because Dylan's the hot butch who no one will come down hard on. But like Dylan's obviously such a compelling character, and Dylan's a character that like, I don't know, in my subject position, I've known many a Dylan, and Dylan is interesting in that like she does kind of encompass, right, like both ends of that spectrum of like, I just want to live my life, okay? Like I'm just trying to like make these like beautiful objects and be with like my partner and like be in this polycule, help raise this child. But then also like her hustle is, she has this giant TikTok account and da 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 da. And there is, I don't know, like this is what I want you to speak more to about is like, there is a sense I felt that Dylan was kind of pulled between these two poles, right? Of like, I'm a woodsy butch, queer utopia. This is who I am in the world. This is what I do. And I just want to get rid of all of that, right? Like, I just want to fucking live. And like, sure, one could say, well, she's just trying to, this is how she feeds her family. Okay, yes. But in her day-to-day interactions when she's not filming, right? Because she doesn't do that out in the open. She does step into that role. Oh my God, I feel like for some reason I feel like I'm using the wrong pronouns or misgendering Dylan, but I'm
No,
not.
You know what? It's so funny that you say that because you're not, but while we were writing the book, we drifted. We drifted from
Oh,
she to they to he,
yeah.
and we kept getting confused. So
yeah,
anyway, funny that you
good
say
job.
that. Yeah.
Please talk about that more too as you respond to this. But there is a sense with her of like even just in her like day-to-day interactions of she is going to step into this kind of like Woodsy Butch archetypal role, right? This more self-conscious role. I'm so interested kind of like just in Dylan as a character, right? Where she's coming from, how you see her, and then this kind of like, am I right in picking up on this like push and pull between wanting that quiet secrecy and wanting to just live, and then also having this sort of like sense of identity, right? In online and just in the world.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Laura I think that I'm just thinking of like where Dylan came from as a character, and Laura had gotten me into this Instagram account um, run by a guy who made furniture from wood, and his wife. He also made like bow and arrows, and he made spoons, like these really specific things that,
Beautiful toys for his beautiful
yeah,
children.
like a perfect little step stool and also a little rocking horse, or something. Anyway, and his wife had her own Instagram account, that was um, she's a textile, she's a
Like a fiber
like a
artist, like
fiber
a
artist, yeah. And I was just like, oh my God, this is the coolest couple I've ever seen in my entire life. There's no plastic in their homes. They eat polenta out of bowls that he has hewn from the trees in their backyard. They hand painted their house. He's wearing a sweater that she made. Like, I don't know. And I think that that is where Dylan came from, was like this fantasy. And then I just remember thinking like somebody took this photo of them. Like
they took this photo
they
of
took
them.
this
Like there's
photo of them.
vanity, like there's
Yeah.
so much vanity that goes into creating this image of them as being like just sort of salt of the earth, like never, oh, I'm just here living my life in the woods, but there's so much vanity.
And there's something about the fact of it being on Instagram, you forget about. It's like you skip right to the thing that's in the picture. You don't think about the fact that somebody took the picture
Yeah.
and then posted it on Instagram.
Yeah, one of my favorite details from Dylan's use of Instagram is that she creates this like reel, or this TikTok reel basically, of her putting her flip phone into a box to put away for the night. But like of course she has to use her smartphone to take the video of the phone. She needs a phone to take a video of the phone going away.
Yeah.
And it like that was one of like the funniest details for me to write. But yeah, I think that Dylan has this vanity that she would desperately want to kind of downplay because she's just in her humble Carhartts or whatever. But yeah,
Costs
but
so much money. Carhartts
that
are
costs so much money, yeah. And also another thing is that she is, resentful, I think rightfully so, of this straight couple that is thirsting after a life in this house and moves in, but like she's creating the kind of content that Rosie was consuming to have that fantasy to begin with. And I
right.
think this is something that I felt when I was living kind of in upstate New York too, where like I think we also knew that we wanted Dylan and Lark to not be born and raised there. They also at one point were new, and so basically when I was upstate, it was like there would be all of these swimming holes that were just like secret, and only like the true locals would get to know about them. But at some point, all of the people that sort of knew about them had at one point moved there. So it was like at some point someone just decided that you belonged and let you in on the secret, but then meanwhile would be posting these like Instagram videos or TikToks or whatever. Like now I feel like a boomer creating just so much just so much content that would send me searching for the swimming hole, so it was sort of this like, you can't come over here, but I will show it to you and make you want it, and then at a certain point I'll decide that you belong and then let you in on it. So that's what I have to say about that.
And it's taking me back again, right, to the like Hudson School paintings, in the 19th century of like, well, here's what the Hudson River Valley looks like, like enjoy your like dirty city, and
Yeah.
kind of, yeah, there's a sense of like, I'll show you the facsimile, but it will be gate kept. And I think that, and that's something that's being done by straight and queer people alike. It's so interesting. So okay, I just have two more questions and then I'll be done. Unless there's a little bit of time, then I might sneak one more in. But I know I want to be time conscious for you too. So penultimate question. Um, we were talking, I think I emailed you to that new inquiry essay on heteropessimism. And Laura, you said you checked that out when it came out.
Mhm.
For those of you watching at home, the heteropessimism essay, I don't know how old it is. It's I think it's maybe 3 or 4 years old, but it's basically an essay about by lesbian woman on this phenomenon of heteropessimism, where we kind of touched on it earlier, where like,
I think Asa is actually a trans guy.
oh, I'm sorry. Oh my God, did I space? I
I
feel
think
like
that might have changed between when
they
the
transition for him.
yeah.
Okay. Wow. Thank you so much. Okay. So yeah, this dude, Asa is his name, had written this article in the New Inquiry about this kind of like discursive phenomenon of basically like straight women being like, ugh, heterosexuality, a prison, am I right? And having a lot of, again, very legitimate complaints, right, about like the patriarchy, like dating, cis men, and kind of having like all of the sort of disastrous kind of results of like, I don't know, this we can't really call it straight culture, can we? We could just call it culture, I guess. The
Mhm.
dominant culture, right? Normalizing intimate partner violence and all forms of misogyny and domestic misogyny. And so this phenomenon of heteropessimism, Asa argues, right, like, well, these complaints are justified. We kind of we overlook two things. We overlook the fact that incels, right, and men going their own way, right, all these men's rights groups are just as heteropessimistic, but they're coming at it from this kind of like highly misogynistic lens, and at times very violently misogynistic. And we also overlook the fact that if we just sort of badmouth heterosexuality, as even Maggie Nelson did, right, and make it our personal problem, right, or refer to it as embarrassing, then any kind of conversation about like, like het dynamics, straight dynamics, potentially like being re-examined and, like explored in ways that could actually heal a lot of the psychic damage done by the patriarchy and could give men a path, a more positive path forward. That those conversations aren't happening, right? And instead we're just saying like, oh, or straight women are saying, I'm so embarrassed of liking men. And then of course you have the really rough incel discourse too. And so the reason I kind of sent the essay to you guys is because your book reminded me of it, and I hadn't thought of it for some time. But um, Rosie, kind of like in her disaffection, right, seems to be something of a heteropessimist, right? Again, like makes perfect sense when women are, um, but the like I'm so curious, this concept of heterosexuality as a prison, and nothing can be done about it, right? Except for, I guess, complaining. Um, it seems that like that like what Asa is saying, maybe like there should be a path forward. That's something that like I don't want to speak for you two, but it feels like the novel might agree with that idea. And I wonder if you could kind of talk a bit more about this concept of heteropessimism, if it's in the novel or not.
Yeah, I remember being really excited coming across that essay while we were writing the novel. Like it reminded me so much of Rosie, and it just like I think I emailed it to Eve
Yeah.
too at that time. And I think that I think that I mean, I think that Rosie is imprisoned by her own like ambivalence and fantasy. And in this case, it's also a fantasy. Her fantasy is about like queer people and queer relationships. So I feel like I see her from her like safe perch of heterosexuality and her like nice, safe home that her like rich husband's family has bought for her, she's like looking out at this queer group and idealizing them and having a crush and trying to think about, and like I think imagining ways that they might help her become like more of herself, or like I think that like I mean Rosie's queer, I think, and she has like this close kind of call relationship from college with the woman that she has a crush on. Like they never have a relationship or even hook up, but she like lies beside her one night and is just like paralyzed by her own desire or for her own ambivalence, I'm not sure, and doesn't actually make a move. And I think that she holds that in her mind as like this path that her life could have taken that would have helped her be more of herself. And I think she looks to Jordan as like the reason why she's not reaching her full potential,
Yeah.
which I think can happen in a lot of ways in romantic relationships. Like maybe you have kids and then start to feel like if only you didn't have kids, you could have put more into your career. But I think when it's a matter of queerness, it's easy to look at your partner. I think it can be easy to look at your partner if you're like sort of a queer woman in a cis relationship, for example, and think, you know, because of my love for you, I'm not reaching my full potential in life, or I'm not being as fully me as I could possibly be. And I think that there are some like pitfalls with that way of thinking. So yeah, yeah.
I think that's really true. Yeah, I'm just thinking of all the pressure she puts on that early relationship that she had with that person in college, and how it just looms, even though it was from an outside perspective, like, what happened? You didn't even kiss? Like, you just lay next to each other? It just looms so large in her life now. And she's really a what if kind of person. And that's a big what if. It goes forwards and backwards in time.
Yeah, we did some like research. We sent out a survey to queer women in relationships with cis men and asked them a bunch of questions about how they felt in their relationships and in queer spaces. And I mean, maybe this is more of like a bi erasure thing, but like a lot of them were sort of like, I don't feel accepted in queer spaces. I don't feel like my queerness is really understood or seen by them. I also don't feel like my queerness is like seen or understood by my, you know, my cis straight partner. And so there was this kind of like isolation or like angst, I think, that a lot of the people that we talked to felt. But yeah, I don't know. I think that like, I don't know. I'm not sure what to say. I think that like when Rosie is trying to imagine this like different version of her life, what she's deciding is to choose against this person that she actually knows specifically and loves, at least theoretically, and just an idea. And I think that that's a hard choice to make. So
yeah, that's true. She knows one.
But at the same time, her relationship is kind of an idea to other people. So it's maybe that's what I'm trying to say. It's like to Rosie, her relationship with Jordan is specific and individual, and to other people, it's an idea of like a kind of life, like it's the idea of straightness. But to her, it's like she has a relationship with her husband.
Yeah.
Specifically, sorry.
No. I agree.
I mean, the thought that came to my mind, right, as you're kind of explaining this, was like, it's almost like for Rosie, anything can be this kind of proxy for self-actualization, whether it's a carrot potato peeler or queerness, you know, like there's this sense of like, I mean, this is where the conversation around queerness, and it's like whether it adheres in us or is immutable or a choice or not, right, is such a wild one. And then when politics gets involved, it's like, whoa. And so I feel like that's like the fact that you sent out that, I would be so curious to see that survey actually, because like the fact that like you sent out that survey is so cool, and the results do not surprise me in the least. They do not surprise me in the least. And I like, yeah, I don't know. I think your book is going to spark some conversations. I'm sure it already has. It sparked this one. So last question, and then I will let you all go. it is the big one, of the like practical side of things, of like, what is, like, you're not solo artists, you're a duet. And
Mhm.
I can't wrap my head around what it would be like to compose a novel like with a friend. You two do it really well. You have another book, The Very Nice Box, is that what it's called?
Yeah, that's the first book. Yeah.
It's the first book. Okay. And oh, and that one's like, yeah, that's like the Office kind of comedy
Yeah.
satire. Oh, that's awesome. So yeah, so like I really want to hear about that process. When you were describing your cars back together, but also sort of socially distanced, I was like, man, I hope a university in the future acquires the, Gleichman Blackett letters or something. Like, it's the sense of this like great
Nice.
literary friendship, right? Where you're kind of like running to each other, talking to each other, right? Distance from the pandemic or just physically, right? Or or in the same room. And yeah, but you take it, you do one better. You actually write books together. And so I just really want to know about that process, and really also how it got started too, like what it's like and how it got started.
Yeah. Well, we met over a decade ago now because we moved into the same apartment building this at the same time. Laura lived upstairs from me and we became friends. And it wasn't until a few years into our friendship, which was a pretty collaborative friendship, that we sort of, I don't know, thought about maybe writing a book together, which I realize is like not the natural like progression of a friendship. Like that's not usually how things go. But I was wrapping up my MFA and Laura was working in tech, and I don't know, I think I just thought I was really a short story writer at heart, and I still feel that way. And I thought there's no way I could ever write a novel. And then I thought, unless maybe, like I think that a lot of people are like, a lot of writers especially say like, how could you possibly write a novel with another person? And I feel the opposite of like, how could you write one alone? And I guess I also I I think I I wonder about how a solo uh, novel is. Like, you're showing your novel to friends, you are showing it to your agent, you're showing it to your editor, and so there is collaboration there already. And so this to me is not that big of a jump forward. But it's wonderful. It's just great. It's great to have somebody tell you your idea is not good. It's great to have somebody tell you your idea is good. We plot the book out a few chapters at a time. And then we sort of go our separate ways and alternate who writes each chapter, and we work out of a Google Doc. And we edit each other. So like if Laura's like texts me and says I just dropped chapter 17, like I immediately go into the Google Doc and I read it, and then I'm like start thinking about the next chapter and I edit Laura's chapter. And so we are both heavily involved in every single character and every single chapter and everything. Like we've both have written everything to the point where I really can't tell. Sometimes I can remember whose turn of phrase something was, um, and sometimes I can remember whose idea the thing was, but more often than not, I can't remember because it's something we talked about together. So yeah, that's my experience of it.
Yeah, I mean, one of the nice things about collaborating is like if you write alone and you keep a little notebook, and every time you have a cool idea, you write it down and then it sits there and does nothing. But with a collaboration, it's like a text, and then the idea is living in someone else's brain and it comes out the other side changed in some way. And so that's really cool. I mean, I think it's really cool to be able to take breaks and then be surprised. It's like when we're in the really kind of rough drafting part of the project, like Eve's chapter is like my favorite content. It's like a new episode of a TV show or something that it's like, what's going to happen now? And so many characters and subplots and just like ideas shake out by surprise. Like at the start of each chapter, we know what roughly needs to happen by the end of it. But like, I would say like most of my favorite ideas weren't planned for. And I think that like in our collaboration, most ideas get a try at least, and then, you know, and then things get cut along the way. But like there's usually like a let's give it a try. That's the vibe. So yeah, it just, and then we were kind of just like mushing this like ball of clay together for a long time, and then in the end, I still feel kind of amazed that it works, but it does.
Man, I like that is the most common sense, like obvious explanation for it. I can't believe I didn't even think of that. I was like, how do they do it? How are they doing it? Of course. And like, and yes, Eve, you're totally right. How Solo is a solo novel. I mean, this is the question, right, that I'm always posing to my students. Like, I use the example of Gordon Lish and Raymond Carver, and I'm like, chicken in the, like, who
Yeah.
is Carver? You know what I mean? Like, and
Yeah.
so how cool is it? Oh my God, like to be writing a book with a friend and forget about, you know, the latest episode of this great TV show, forget about this latest release. My really good friend who I love to collaborate with just wrote the next chapter of our novel. It just dropped. Like, that sounds incredible. And I mean, like, you know, mazel to you two for having such a cool dynamic in that way. And also like it's like that specific form of it, that's gotta be rare, right? Because like I feel like I do have so many really great friends who I can give them like, you know, a work in progress, and they can diagnose immediately what's off, what needs some work, what's working great. But it's a rare friend indeed, you know, whom you can be like, we are going to do this chapter by chapter. So that is so cool. I think this is my tiny little follow-up question, and I'll promise to let you go. Would you two like, I imagine you're going to continue writing novels together. I hope you do. Is there a future though where like in addition to that, say for instance, Eve, you're like, okay, and now I'm gonna publish a collection, right? Or Laura, you're like, okay, and now I'm gonna publish like a solo novel or something else. Like, is that something that might happen, or you know, are you open or not, or like what do you see in that arena?
Yeah, I'm open. I'm open to doing it alone, to doing something alone. Probably not a novel. That feels like there's no way
No,
I could
well,
do.
you would be the collection, the short story.
Yeah. Collection, maybe. I do love short stories. It's hard to imagine, honestly. It's like moving from business class to coach. Like I really love, I really love having a buddy. I think what's more likely is that we would find a new way to collaborate.
Cool. Yeah.
But you know, I also never thought I would ever write a novel. So I'm open to the
Well,
possibility.
I want you two to always continue collaborating no matter what. Like I mean I hope to read a very nice box soon as well. But like yeah, I mean whatever paths you take individually, you know, I hope it's in addition to you two writing novels together.
Thank
Um
you.
yeah, it's a great book. Here it is again, folks. Trust and Safety. I never edit these. I just like include the entire video. I don't know how these Zoomers with their YouTube videos. Oh my God, it's just so much to edit. But so all my talking will be in here. But yes, please read Trust and Safety. It's on my hat, and it'll also be linked in many places in the Substack. Um, Laura and Eve, it's been such a pleasure speaking to you both. I'm going to stop the recording before I stop the Zoom, but I'll give you a round of applause, my friends. This is amazing. And
Thank
Thank
you
you. Thanks so
so
much.
much, Raf. It was so fun to talk to you. Really appreciate your questions. That was
thank
really
you.
fun.
Well, I
Yeah.
really appreciate your book. And actually, a lot of my friends have already. I'll give it to
Oh,
them.
good.
Yeah.
Cool.
You got some more and more fans. But and it just it like just pubbed, right? May 21st.
May
Yeah.
21st. Yeah, a couple weeks ago.
Get it while it's hot.
Yes.
All
Yes.
right. Stop it.